There is something your soulmate recently discovered that they never expected to uncover, and the truth has been affecting them more deeply than they are willing to admit. What makes this situation so important is that it did not begin with a dramatic confrontation or a shocking revelation. Instead, it started with a feeling, a quiet feeling that something wasn't quite right. For a long time, they trusted what they saw on the surface. They accepted certain explanations without questioning them. They listened to certain voices without realizing how much influence those voices had over their perspective. Everything seemed normal, at least for a while. But lately, something has been changing. Small details that once appeared insignificant have started demanding their attention. Certain memories have returned. Certain conversations have resurfaced in their mind. And the more they reflect on those moments, the more they realize that there may have been much more happening behind the scenes than they originally understood. Your soulmate didn't arrive at this realization overnight. In fact, for a long time, they ignored the subtle signs. Whenever something felt unusual, they brushed it aside. Whenever a situation seemed confusing, they convinced themselves there was a reasonable explanation. But eventually, too many questions began appearing. Too many moments refused to make sense. They started noticing patterns that had once gone completely unnoticed. Certain comments suddenly felt different when remembered from a new perspective. Certain interactions no longer seemed as innocent as they once appeared. And with every new realization, an uncomfortable thought began growing stronger. What if someone had been influencing the situation more than they realized? The more they thought about it, the harder it became to dismiss that possibility. They began replaying past events in their mind, looking at them through fresh eyes. What they discovered wasn't necessarily one major event. It was a series of small moments that now seemed connected. Moments that may have created misunderstandings. Moments that may have encouraged doubt. Moments that may have quietly affected the way they viewed certain situations. And for the first time, your soulmate started questioning whether every conclusion they reached in the past was truly their own. What makes this realization so powerful is that it is forcing them to reconsider things they once believed with complete certainty. They are beginning to understand that not everyone who appears supportive always has pure intentions. Not every influence is obvious. Sometimes confusion is created gradually, one small moment at a time, until it becomes difficult to recognize where it started. And as this awareness continues growing, your soulmate feels themselves moving closer to a truth they can no longer ignore. A truth that has the power to change how they see the past, how they understand the present, and most importantly, how they view the connection they share with you. Because the deeper they look, the more they realize that someone may have tried to stand between what was real and what they were being led to believe. And now, for the first time, they are beginning to see beyond the illusion. As the days passed, your soulmate found it increasingly difficult to ignore what they were noticing. What began as a small feeling of uncertainty slowly developed into a deeper awareness. At first, they thought they might be overthinking things. They told themselves that everyone occasionally looks back at old situations and wonders if they missed something. But this felt different. The more they reflected, the more certain details kept resurfacing. Conversations they had forgotten suddenly returned to their memory. Certain comments that once seemed harmless now carried a completely different meaning. The strange part was that these realizations didn't happen all at once. They arrived gradually, like pieces of a puzzle slowly falling into place. Each new piece revealed something they hadn't noticed before. And each discovery made it harder to ignore the possibility that someone may have been influencing their perception all along. One of the first things your soulmate began noticing was how often confusion seemed to appear whenever the Connection between you became stronger. At the time, they never questioned it. Life is complicated, and misunderstandings happen. That is what they told themselves. But now, looking back, they started recognizing a pattern. Whenever progress seemed possible, something would suddenly create doubt. Whenever clarity appeared, confusion would somehow follow. Certain opinions seemed to appear at exactly the right moment to make them question their instincts. Certain conversations left them second-guessing feelings they had previously trusted. At the time, they assumed these events were unrelated. Now they are not so sure. The deeper they reflected, the more uncomfortable the realization became. They started remembering moments when someone offered advice that seemed helpful on the surface, but somehow left them feeling more uncertain afterward. They remembered situations where certain details were emphasized, while other details were conveniently ignored. They remembered feeling pulled away from their own intuition without fully understanding why. What troubles them now is not simply the possibility that someone influenced them. What troubles them is realizing how effective that influence may have been. Because when doubt is introduced slowly, it rarely feels like manipulation. It feels like concern. It feels like guidance. It feels like reasonable advice. And that is exactly why it can be so difficult to recognize. As these thoughts continued growing, your soulmate began examining past events from a completely different perspective. Suddenly, things that never made sense before started making sense. Certain reactions seemed unusual. Certain behaviors appeared more intentional than accidental. They realized there were moments when they ignored their own feelings because someone else's opinion seemed louder. There were moments when they trusted outside influences more than the quiet voice inside themselves. Looking back now, they can see how those choices affected their understanding of the connection. They can see how confusion slowly replaced clarity. They can see how doubt was allowed to grow in places where trust might have otherwise developed. And listen carefully, because this is where the truth starts becoming impossible to ignore. The more your soulmate reflects, the more they realize that the signs were always there. They simply didn't have the perspective to see them at the time. Sometimes the truth remains hidden, not because it is invisible, but because people are looking in the wrong direction. Your soulmate was focused on solving problems, understanding circumstances, and making sense of situations. They never stopped to question whether someone else's influence might be contributing to the confusion itself. But now that possibility is becoming harder and harder to dismiss. What surprises them most is how different everything looks once they begin connecting the dots. Events that once felt random now seem connected. Moments that once seemed insignificant now appear meaningful. Patterns that were invisible before are suddenly impossible to overlook. And with each realization comes another layer of understanding. They are beginning to see that some of the doubts they carried may not have originated from their own heart at all. Some of the uncertainty that kept them stuck may have been reinforced by someone who benefited from keeping things unclear. This growing awareness is changing everything. It is forcing your soulmate to reevaluate what they believed, what they accepted, and what they overlooked. Most importantly, it is pushing them toward a truth they have avoided for far too long. Because every memory they revisit, every conversation they re-examine, and every pattern they uncover seems to point toward the same conclusion. Someone may have played a much larger role in creating distance and confusion than they ever realized. And now that your soulmate is finally seeing the signs clearly, there is no going back to the version of reality they once accepted without question. The truth is beginning to emerge, and with it comes a level of clarity they have not experienced in a very long time. Eventually, your soulmate reached a point where they could no longer explain away what they were seeing. The signs had become too consistent. The patterns had become too clear. What once seemed like isolated incidents now appeared connected by a single thread, and that realization hit them harder than they expected. For a long time, they gave this person the benefit of the doubt. They assumed good intentions. They believed that any confusion, misunderstandings, or delays were simply unfortunate circumstances. But the more they reflected on everything that had happened, the more difficult it became to maintain that belief. There comes a moment when a person can no longer ignore what is directly in front of them, and your soulmate has arrived at that moment. The truth they are beginning to see is not only changing how they view this person, but also changing how they understand everything that happened between you and them. At first, the realization brought shock, not because they suddenly uncovered one dramatic secret, but because they finally understood how many small things had influenced their perspective over time. They started remembering moments when they questioned their own instincts, even though those instincts were trying to guide them in the right direction. They remembered times when they felt certain about something, only to leave a conversation feeling confused. They remembered situations where they doubted emotions that once felt genuine and clear. Looking back now, those moments seem very different. They no longer appear random. Instead, they seem like pieces of a larger picture that was hidden from view until now. As this understanding deepened, disappointment began replacing shock. Your soulmate is disappointed not only in the situation itself, but also in the fact that they didn't recognize it sooner. They keep asking themselves difficult questions. How did they miss the signs? Why did they trust certain narratives without questioning them? Why did they allow outside influences to become louder than their own intuition? These questions are not easy to answer, yet they continue returning because your soulmate knows that growth requires honesty. They know that if they want clarity moving forward, they must first acknowledge what happened in the past. And that process is forcing them to confront some uncomfortable truths. One of the most painful realizations is understanding how much time may have been lost because of this interference. Time spent doubting instead of trusting. Time spent questioning instead of understanding. Time spent focusing on confusion rather than recognizing what was real. This realization creates a deep sense of regret. Not because they can change the past, but because they can now see how different things might have been if they had trusted themselves more. Every new insight reveals another moment where things could have unfolded differently. Every reflection reminds them of opportunities that may have been delayed because someone else's influence clouded their judgment. And listen carefully, because this is where the emotional breakthrough truly begins. The more your soulmate uncovers, the less power the confusion holds over them. Truth has a unique effect. Once it is seen clearly, it becomes difficult to return to old illusions. Your soulmate is discovering this firsthand. The narratives they once accepted no longer feel convincing. The doubts they once carried no longer feel justified. The assumptions they once believed are beginning to collapse under the weight of new understanding. What remains is a growing awareness that many of the obstacles they thought existed may never have been as real as they appeared. This realization is creating a profound shift within them. For the first time, they are separating their own feelings from the influence of others. They are beginning to ask themselves what they genuinely believe rather than what they were encouraged to believe. They are questioning old conclusions and re-examining old memories through a lens of honesty. And every time they do, they keep arriving at the same place. The connection they share with you feels different now, not because it changed, but because they are finally seeing it without the layers of confusion that once surrounded it. What makes this moment so powerful is that it represents freedom. Freedom from misunderstandings. Freedom from distorted perceptions. Freedom from the influence that kept them disconnected from their own truth. Your soulmate is no longer focused on defending the past or justifying what happened. They are focused on understanding it. They are focused on learning from it. Most importantly, they are focused on making sure they never ignore their intuition in the same way again. Because now they see what they could not see before. Now they understand what was hidden beneath the surface. And now that the truth has finally revealed itself, there is no way for them to unsee it. The illusion is fading. The answers are emerging, and your soulmate is beginning to realize just how much was standing between them and the truth they were meant to discover all along. Once your soulmate accepted the truth about the person who had been influencing their perspective, something remarkable began happening. Their attention slowly shifted away from the confusion and toward the connection itself. For so long, their thoughts had been occupied by misunderstandings, doubts, unanswered questions, and conflicting emotions. It was difficult to see clearly when so much noise surrounded the situation. But now, as that noise begins to fade, they are finding themselves looking at you in a completely different way. It feels as though a fog that had lingered for a long time is finally lifting. And with every layer that disappears, they are discovering truths that were hidden beneath the surface all along. One of the first things they noticed was how different certain memories feel now. Moments they once viewed with uncertainty suddenly carry a new meaning. Conversations that once seemed ordinary now feel significant. Experiences they previously overlooked now stand out in ways they never expected. It is not that the memories themselves have changed. What has changed is the perspective through which they are viewing them. When confusion is removed, clarity has room to grow. And as your soulmate revisits these moments, they are beginning to see details they missed before. They are noticing genuine emotions where they once focused on doubt. They are recognizing sincerity where they once questioned intentions. Most importantly, they are beginning to understand how much the connection truly meant to them. The deeper they reflect, the more they realize that many of the doubts they carried were never fully aligned with what their heart was trying to tell them. There were moments when their intuition tried to guide them toward understanding, but outside, influences created enough uncertainty to make them second-guess themselves. Now that those influences are losing their power, your soulmate is reconnecting with feelings they had pushed aside. Feelings that remained beneath the surface despite every attempt to ignore them. And what surprises them most is how natural those feelings still feel. They are not forced. They are not imagined. They are simply there, waiting to be acknowledged. As this process continues, your soulmate finds themselves becoming more honest about what they truly experienced whenever they thought about you. Instead of focusing on what others suggested, they are finally paying attention to their own emotional reality. They are remembering the comfort they felt, the connection they felt, the sense of familiarity that often appeared when they least expected it. These memories are no longer competing with confusion. They are standing on their own, and because of that they feel stronger than ever before. Every reflection seems to reinforce the same understanding. The connection was never as complicated as they once believed. The confusion surrounding it made it appear complicated. And listen carefully, because this realization is changing more than their view of the past. It is changing the way they see the present as well. Your soulmate is beginning to separate truth from assumption. They are learning to distinguish between what they genuinely felt and what they were encouraged to believe. This distinction is incredibly important because it allows them to reclaim ownership of their own emotions. No longer are they relying on someone else's interpretation of events. No longer are they viewing the connection through a distorted lens. Instead, they are allowing themselves to experience it honestly for the first time in a very long while. With each passing day, the emotional barriers that once existed continue weakening. The walls built from uncertainty are slowly coming down. And behind those walls, your soulmate is discovering something they did not expect to find. Appreciation. Appreciation for the lessons. Appreciation for the connection. Appreciation for the emotions that survived despite all the confusion that surrounded them. They are beginning to understand that genuine connections do not disappear simply because they encounter obstacles. Sometimes those obstacles only reveal how strong the connection truly is. This growing awareness is creating a profound shift within them. The person who once felt uncertain is becoming more confident. The person who once questioned everything is beginning to trust themselves again. And as that trust returns, so does their ability to recognize what has always been important. They are no longer looking at the connection through the eyes of fear, doubt, or outside influence. They are looking at it through the eyes of truth. And what they see now feels very different from what they believed before. For the first time in a long time, your soulmate feels as though they are finally understanding the connection for what it really is, rather than what others led them to believe it was. That understanding is bringing clarity, peace, and a renewed sense of purpose. The confusion that once stood between them and the truth is fading into the background. In its place, a clearer picture is emerging. A picture that reveals not only who they are becoming, but also how important this connection has been throughout their journey. And the more clearly they see it, the harder it becomes to imagine turning away from the truth they have finally found. And now your soulmate finds themselves standing at the beginning of a completely new chapter. Not because everything has suddenly become perfect, and not because every question has already been answered, but because the truth has finally replaced the confusion that once controlled the situation. There is something incredibly powerful about seeing things clearly after spending so much time looking through a distorted lens. The moment clarity arrives, everything starts to change. The emotions feel different. The memories feel different. Even the future begins to look different. Your soulmate is experiencing that shift right now. They are no longer focused on the person who created doubt, confusion, or distance. Instead, their attention is turning toward what truly matters. They are beginning to understand that dwelling on interference only keeps them connected to the past, while embracing the truth allows them to move forward. As they continue reflecting on everything they have learned, one realization keeps becoming stronger. The connection survived. Despite misunderstandings, despite delays, despite outside influences, something meaningful remained. There is a part of them that finds comfort in this discovery. Because if a connection can withstand confusion and still remain significant, then perhaps it was never as fragile as they once believed. This understanding is giving them a renewed sense of confidence. They are starting to trust their feelings again. They are starting to trust their instincts again. Most importantly, they are beginning to trust the lessons that this entire experience has taught them. The truth has also changed the way your soulmate views challenges. Before, they saw obstacles as signs that something was wrong. Now they are beginning to see them differently. They are realizing that some challenges exist to reveal hidden truths. Some difficulties force people to grow. Some setbacks expose things that would have otherwise remained hidden forever. If this person had never revealed their true influence, your soulmate might have continued living with unanswered questions. They might have continued doubting themselves. They might have continued looking in the wrong direction for answers. But now everything is different. The confusion has served its purpose. It revealed what needed to be seen. And listen carefully, because this is where the most important transformation is happening. Your soulmate is no longer allowing the past to define their future. For a long time, old misunderstandings carried weight. Old assumptions shaped decisions. Old narratives influenced the way they saw the connection. But those narratives are losing their power. The truth is becoming stronger than the stories they once believed. With every passing day, they feel themselves becoming more aligned with what their heart has known all along. They are no longer interested in confusion. They are no longer interested in listening to voices that pull them away from their own intuition. They want honesty. They want clarity. They want authenticity. This shift is creating a sense of momentum within them. They feel as though they are finally moving forward instead of standing still. The emotional fog that once surrounded a connection is disappearing, and in its place is a growing sense of certainty. Not certainty about every outcome, but certainty about what matters. Certainty about what they feel. Certainty about what they have learned. Certainty about the importance of trusting themselves moving forward. What makes this chapter so significant is that it is being built on truth rather than assumption. For the first time in a long while, your soulmate feels free from the influence that once clouded their judgment. They are seeing people, situations, and emotions more clearly than before. And as they continue moving forward, they are carrying that clarity with them. The lessons have been learned. The illusions have been exposed. The misunderstandings are fading away. Now, instead of focusing on who tried to stand in the way, your soulmate is focused on what remains after the truth has been revealed. And what remains is something they can no longer ignore. A connection that continued to matter despite every challenge. A truth that refused to stay hidden forever. And a future that suddenly feels far more open, far more hopeful, and far more aligned with the path their heart has been trying to follow all along.